Europe struck again. Dozens are killed in Nice, France during Bastille Day celebrations after an attacker drives into the crowd. It's the sixth major attack to hit the region this year. Where does Europe go from here? It's the sixth major attack to hit Europe this year alone. France was ready to lift its state of emergency at the end of this month, which was imposed after November's attacks in Paris left 130 dead. Now it will be extended for 3 more months. But will it make a difference? Today on the Newsmakers, we ask, what will it take for Europe to put an end to a new era of terror? On Thursday evening, an attacker ploughed his truck over a crowd in Nice, France, as Bastille Day commemorations were underway. Dozens of people, including many children, were killed before police shot the attacker. He had driven 2 kilometers.
It's quite a harrowing scene, to be honest. I've seen one guy actually run, sobbing, crying. We've seen people holding babies, screaming, shouting, mothers running for cover. It was horrendous.
It is the 7th major attack to hit Europe in just the past 9 months. France was ready to lift its state of emergency at the end of this month, which was imposed after November's attacks in Paris that left 130 dead. Now it'll be extended for 3 more months. But will it make a difference? Today on the Newsmakers, we ask, what will it take for Europe to put an end to a new era of terror?
A brutal rampage stopped by lethal ultimatum. Left behind, signs of innocence lost. The killing spree in Nice marks the 3rd major attack in France in less than 2 years.
It does not seem safe anymore in France. Nice is not a big city and it does not attract that much attention. So if this can be a target, anywhere can be a target.
This attack fell on Bastille Day, a national holiday that celebrates liberty and independence. And while it's not yet clear whether Daesh was behind it, officials are already pointing the finger. Previous attacks revealed aimless youths and petty criminals from the margins of French society were responsible. Daesh has rooted its cause in the taking back of territory delineated a century ago by colonial France and Britain. The group appears to be exploiting the divisions in French society that are in some measure a vestige of its colonial past. And while Daesh is on the back foot militarily in Iraq, Syria, and Libya, the threat of its attacks in Europe is growing.
J'ai décidé que l'état d'urgence, qui devait prendre fin le 26 juillet, serait prolongé de 3 mois.
More than 8 months since the Paris attacks, France was preparing to breathe a sigh of relief. The state of emergency that allows police to carry out raids without a warrant and summarily place people under house arrest was about to be lifted. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls had said the threat represented by Daesh could mean its extension for as long as it is necessary. Rights groups have criticized European governments for similar security crackdowns they say violate basic freedoms and stifle dissent.
Fear of terrorism led many people to begin to scapegoat the refugees. It led to rising Islamophobia and trampling on basic rights, particularly to privacy, without any real showing of even effectiveness for those measures.
Far-right parties in France and in a number of Western countries have seized on the attacks to further their cause, and in doing so have perpetuated the theory of an inevitable clash of civilizations, a narrative also propagated by Daesh. These attacks have shown the strength of the social fabric that holds France together. After the Charlie Hebdo massacre and the Paris attacks last year, an outpouring of sympathy and compassion from around the globe to the world's most visited country.
A sad day for France, for Europe, for all of us here.
International leaders have expressed solidarity with France and promised to work together. But there are a number of interwoven issues they must face. A military campaign against Daesh in Iraq and Syria, a refugee crisis, along with homegrown terror attacks with vague motivations. All the while, preserving liberty, something for which in France, there's been a high price to pay. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the Nice attack and Europe's terror threat from Glasgow is Dr Azeem Ibrahim, a fellow at Mansfield College and former National Security Advisor to the Labour Party, and Ricardo Baretzky, the President of the European Centre for Information Policy and Security, joining us live from Antwerp. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Let me start with you, Ricardo Baretzky. How much of this attack has to do with France only, and how much of it has to do with this these attacks from Daesh across the world in recent months?
Well, it's difficult to say, but the reality is that that there's certainly a sentiment that France is one of the main targets, and as we've heard in the past, there's even been speculation about its colonial past. The reality here is that we have to pay serious attention to the growing threat, and that these threats and these events is increasing, they're not decreasing. And we have warned before, several months ago, that they're likely to increase. And the fact remains is that very few has paid attention to these warning signs written on the walls.
So tell me a little bit about the state of emergency, Ricardo. There was a state of emergency. It was prolonged. Was it not good enough? The thousands of raids, did they not produce anything? Or is it proof that it was a waste of time, or that it wasn't done properly?
Well, we firmly believe as an organization, first of all, that there's certain flaws in the way that's conducted. Primarily, they have to understand what type of warfare they're dealing with. And I think that they haven't come to grips yet with what the problem and what Daesh or ISIL is capable of. And at the second time, or in the second sense, they have not understood yet that they're dealing with a type of guerrilla warfare. And they haven't seen this before, so they're learning as they're going along, and that's a huge mistake.
Okay, Azeem, is that true that the French haven't quite come to grips with the nature of the threat?
Not necessarily. I believe that, we have to understand why these attacks are actually increasing. France has been hit almost every 2 months now for more than a year. And the fundamental reason is that ISIS, unlike other terrorist organizations, measures its success very differently. It measures it by the amount of territory it actually controls. Unlike Al-Qaeda, for example, that used to see success in the number of attacks actually executed around the globe. But as ISIS begins to lose its territory, it still has to remain relevant on the global stage as a serious geopolitical player. And it can only do so by undertaking more terrorist attacks around the globe. And this is why they are now resorting to the Al-Qaeda model of promoting self-starter cells throughout the globe to self-radicalize individuals, disenfranchised individuals, to come and carry out these attacks. And there's very little Western security services can actually do, especially individuals such as this, who has not appeared on any intelligence or on the radar of any of the intelligence agencies, and it was simply just a petty criminal that was disenfranchised from French society.
Ricardo, is there a silver lining in a way? And I know this would be terribly offensive in many ways to people who have lost loved ones, but looking sort of long term, the fact that they've lost Ramadi, that they've lost Fallujah, that they might lose Mosul, and this is just a symptom of that, and they're lashing out. Does this mean that the more they lash out, the weaker they are overall, and perhaps not too long down the road, they might actually cease to exist, Ricardo?
In a certain sense, I would say yes. In a certain sense, I would say no. The problem with the estimation or the understanding of ISIL is how big it really is. What is the organization capable of, and what is its real goals in its territory expansion goals? Like any terrorist organization, territory is key. But what we have to understand here is that, the visible front of ISIL is only the front visible to public. In the intelligence services and globally, the real picture looks rather very different. So there's two sides to this particular view, and either or neither of them is right or wrong at the same time. The really important part is are we witnessing only the beginning, or are we witnessing something that's far advanced? We firmly believe, based on the research and information available, that this is only in the beginning stages, and the threat of ISIL should not be underestimated. particularly at this point in time.
Okay, Ricardo, how would you stop them physically?
I get asked this question a lot. What contingency plan is to be put in? Well, first of all, Europe needs to review its policies. It needs to review its policies as a whole when it comes to security and its measures. And the problem is here that we need to integrate global relations, particularly on information sharing. One of the big problems in Europe is that information is not shared properly. We've said it time and again. And this is a classic situation because nobody really knows whether this person was on the radar or not. You're going to have more of these attacks where people is not on the radar and more than likely was in contact with somebody, but information wasn't shared anyway.
Okay, Azeem, in terms of the methodology and the nature of this attack, what does that tell you? So this wasn't a suicide bombing, this wasn't a grenade attack, it was ramming with a truck. What does that say to you, and what lessons can we draw from that, given the variety of attacks that ISIS has shown over the past few years?
Well, this is a very low technology attack, which anybody essentially could undertake. There was no weaponry required, there was no explosives required, which are sometimes difficult to obtain in Europe. But the fundamental question that we, as a society, need to ask ourselves is that why are these attacks actually happening? And they serve no strategic purpose to ISIS whatsoever. They are hardly going to lead to the fall of Western civilization or the fall of the French government. It also alienates the majority of the Muslims around the globe that are horrified by such attacks. But as I said before, they're undertaking these attacks because they have to remain relevant. One of the reasons why ISIS has been so successful is because success breeds success. It has been the most successful terrorist organization on the globe in terms of its expansion of territory, and it has to continuously show that success to continuously attract recruits. If you're a young radicalized Westerner, you are going to join the organization that has essentially the most success, and this is how ISIS demonstrates its success. And secondly, it also drives fissures between Muslims in the West and Western right-wing extremists. ISIS actually want the likes of Donald Trump, Geert Wilders and the Le Pens to come to power so that they can create animosity amongst these civilizations, which the Muslims will then, hopefully, from ISIS's perspective, will look towards ISIS as the only alternative to living in the West.
Ricardo, looking at...
And we simply can't give in to that.
Okay, Ricardo, looking at what President Hollande said in the immediate aftermath, he said, nothing will make us yield in our will to fight terrorism. We will further strengthen our actions in Iraq and Syria. We will continue striking those who attack us on our own soil. Now, he's said that basically they're going to continue their course. Is that wise, or should he rather be thinking of a recalibration? Because we know that in the immediate aftermath of the November attacks, France conducted a bombing campaign on Raqqa. That didn't destroy ISIS in the least. Is he wise to say that they're going to stay the course in Iraq and Syria, Ricardo?
Well, anybody who's an advisor in security and going into battle on the battlefield will tell you it's the worst thing to let your enemy know what you're going to do. And I think this is a typical classic situation where it is putting a public to one point, but at the same time taking a huge risk. And certainly not wise at all, in our opinion. And this is one of the problems. That the potentiality of managing this and containing this is to a certain degree blocked before they can actually really do that. Right. You don't provide intelligence to the ground, and this is exactly what we are seeing.
Right. Now, this is the 6th attack in Europe just this year, as we mentioned. Let's just take you through a bit of a timeline here. In January, a suicide bomber struck Istanbul's historic district, killing 13 people. In March, a suicide bombing in Istanbul killed 4 people. Later that month, 32 people were killed in Brussels in triple bombings at the airport and metro station, the deadliest terror attack in Belgium's history. And in June, 2 more attacks hit Istanbul, killing a total of 56 people. One of those attacks was at Turkey's busiest airport, Ataturk International. Azeem, is there a way to separate out these attacks? Like, is it fair to ask the question, would the attack in Turkey be different to the attack in Paris?
all the attacks are essentially the same. You know, ISIS do not distinguish between Muslim and non-Muslim targets. In fact, the number one enemy of ISIS and organizations like it are actually other Muslims, are actually Shias, and that is the number one target, the number biggest victims. You know, they bombed Indonesia, they bombed Turkey, they even bombed Medina, the holiest site in Islam. So there's no distinguishing whatsoever between the various attacks. They simply need to undertake as many attacks as possible to remain relevant, to remain in the media eye, to create discord between Muslim populations in the West and their Western hosts. They want to ensure that the refugees are alienated. They want to ensure that Muslims have difficult lives in the West, and we simply cannot give in to that narrative of clash of civilizations.
Now, let's just go back to the political response from global leaders to the attack in Nice. They've been pouring in. Let's take a little listen to some of what has been said. Well, as the world watches closely, terror sympathizers may be watching even closer online. As the digital space evolves, terrorism activity is following suit. So is it time for governments to take on a more innovative approach to combat attacks? Let's bring in Shahed Amanallah now. He's a former senior advisor for technology at the US Department of State and currently co-founder and director of Affinis Labs. It's a tech incubator that focuses on trying to use digital tools to fight radicalization. Shahed, thanks for joining the discussion. This is not working clearly. This approach has been ongoing for a few years now, trying to stop Daesh from spreading its propaganda online. It seems to have been like a game of whack-a-mole. You put one down and it pops up elsewhere. People have been trying to push out counter-narratives. More than 80 people are dead on the streets of Nice. It's been yet another attack. Why isn't this working, and why is the world incapable of stopping these guys from spreading their message?
Well, it's not working, first of all, because we've accepted this new world that we live in where everyone can communicate and connect with everybody. And we've accepted culturally that we don't want any impediments to that. We want free flows of information. We want people to be able to get in touch with each other in real time. And we have to accept that what comes with that is that ideas and ideologies can freely spread everywhere. So we have two choices. We can either limit or stifle or censor that, which I think is extremely problematic, or we can encourage, allow, empower people to create alternate centers of gravity. The reason that I think a lot of people are gravitating toward this very particular narrative is because when they go online to seek answers to their grievances, that's the one that they find, and that they're not finding the other ones. And part of that is because, you know, it's easy to take a grievance online. It's not so easy to cultivate what that other side of it is, whether it's a positive expression of your religious identity or a positive way to address a grievance. We don't see as much of that because people are going on their ordinary lives. But we have to figure out a way to create spaces where people who otherwise might go violent or otherwise might be attracted will find other ways to express that, not bottle it in. And we have to deal with this crisis of masculinity, anger, this discourse of anger that social media has actually cultivated. And I think this is a societal problem, not just specific to this.
Shahed, let me come in here. Is it a responsibility of the Muslim community and Muslim communities worldwide to say, yes, there is a problem with extremism within the tradition. These guys are drawing this from the texts and we need to do something about it and be honest with ourselves. Is that a priority?
Well, there are multiple factors. I think that is an important factor, but we also have to keep in mind to the extent that ideology that comes from Muslim scholars and clerics, for example, if that was truly a large factor, we would see far more Muslims actually engaging in this. The fact that we're seeing literally 1 in a million reacting to the scholarship in that view tells us that there's something else going on. And I think that one of the things that Muslim communities have to deal with is this culture and discourse of anger that's happening. There are angry people in Muslim communities, and we have to figure out a way to address that anger in constructive ways so that they don't look for those verses that will allow them to activate that anger and turn it into some kind of uncontrollable rage.
Azeem, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Dabik, all forms of expression from Daesh have called for these lone wolf or self-starter attacks. And I guess what's interesting and different from Al-Qaeda is that you don't have to get authorization from a sheikh or your line manager within the terror group as such. You can just go out and do it if you're a member of the fan club. How crucial is that difference? And is it a fight you can never quite win because there's no paper trail, there's no points and dots to connect along the way. There's nobody to nab in the process.
Indeed, and this is the franchise model that Al-Qaeda actually adopted, is that you promote self-starter cells to self-radicalize. And before, Al-Qaeda would plan, fund and execute terrorist operations from its headquarters, but then eventually they moved on to just trying to self-radicalize individuals, and we've seen that in Madrid, in Bali, in 7/7. And this is the methodology that ISIS is now adopting. And if you look at the profile of the majority of these attackers, they're actually relatively quite similar. Usually they're socially, economically disenfranchised. They're usually unemployed. They have a history of petty crime, in and out of prison, minor drug dealers, religiously completely illiterate. And what ISIS offers them is instant redemption. You know, these are people on the margins of society that feel that they have been left behind. And what ISIS offers them is reception, that you can be instantly transformed into a warrior of God instantaneously. And that is very attractive for people that feel completely alienated and do not feel part of society.
Ricardo, what Shahed was talking about, fighting the war of ideas, is that as important as fighting these guys physically?
I think so, yes. The reality, I think, and it's something we mustn't miss out here on, is that, you know, ISIL is using psychological warfare. They have managed to understood the way of recruitment, particularly as mentioned by the other participant, on self-recruitment and self-radicalization. They've understood that is a value-added facet to their process. Now, the warfare that ISIL is fighting has different layers. And this is something that is not well understood between many security officers in the world. The psychological warfare is only one part. The self-psychological assessment is another factor. So what we are witnessing, in fact, in the public domain is what we call the first and second layer. The third, fourth, and fifth layer is totally hidden, and that poses a real danger, particularly to those who is trying to combat this and don't understand this. And it's a bit deeper than just radicalization.
Right, okay. Final question for Shahed, because we are running out of time. Shahed, if the French called you in right now and said, hey, we've got a serious problem in our country, we keep getting hit by Daesh, there's a major problem of radicalization, what's the first thing we need to do to help stop this? What would you tell them if you were at the table? What do we do, Shahed?
Well, if you look at all these attacks that are happening in France, the thing that makes it possible is this cultural and social division between the attacker and those that they're attacking. And so it stands to reason that any division that you have in French society is going to exacerbate that and make more possible. So the answer is to pull together as French citizens, both Muslim and other, so that you create a united front and heal some of those divisions. And that means some of those people that are exacerbating these divisions need to be challenged.
Okay, Shahed, Amanallah, Azeem Ibrahim and Ricardo Baretzky, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. You've been watching a special edition of the Newsmakers as we asked what it will take for Europe to put an end to a new era of terror. On Thursday evening, an attacker drove his truck 2 kilometers through a crowd in Nice, France, as Bastille Day commemorations were underway. Dozens of people, including many children, were killed before police shot the attacker. The European Council president said it was a tragic paradox that the subjects of the Nice attack were people celebrating liberty, equality and brotherhood. You've been watching this special edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. We'll leave you with some harrowing images of the aftermath of the Nice attack.